I was just a concubine-born daughter of the Shangshu household. Because my fate was cursed, they shipped me off to the countryside to toil like a farmhand. 16 years later, my so-called father suddenly called me back to the capital. Turns out, he wanted me to marry in place of my legitimate sister, to a prince who's both crippled and cursed to bring death to his brides. To survive, I grabbed all I could and tried to run in the middle of the night. The moment I jumped down the wall, a pair of strong arms caught me in midair. "Aren't you still climbing walls like you used to in the countryside, Princess Consort? If you don't want to get married, fine. Let's hand you over to the magistrate then." Wait, turn me in to the authorities? It was nearly midnight. I was standing on top of the Shangshu Manor's 3-foot wall, ready to leap. I clenched my teeth and dove for it. But instead of crashing into the ground, I landed in someone's arms. When I opened my eyes, I was staring into a pair of narrow peach blossom eyes curved with amusement. Didn't expect the Princess Consort to be just as spirited even after coming back to the capital. Still climbing walls, I see. My eyes went wide. I scrambled out of his arms, brushing myself off in panic. "Princess Consort, you've got the wrong person. The name's Chun Feng. Got it?" Only when I stood up did I realize he was sitting. My eyes slowly drifted down to his legs. I blurted out, "You're crippled?" And then I remembered that painting I'd seen earlier by the study. You're that lame prince everyone says is cursed." As soon as I said it, I turned and ran. Didn't even make it 2 steps before I stumbled on a stone and face planted forward. From behind came his voice, flat and a bit dim-witted. "She's not my princess consort. Guard, take this thief to the authorities." I rolled over and looked back at him, tightening my brows. Gone was that calm, polished air from moments ago. He really seemed slow-witted now. But if I really got reported to the authorities, the Feng family would chew me up and spit me out. Trying to save my skin, I dropped to my knees and pleaded, "Please, Your Highness, show mercy. I'm not a thief. I just stepped out to catch some air. If you want the real princess consort, I can go back in and get her for you." But he just shook his head, expression never changing. "You climbed over the wall. That makes you a thief. Thieves go to the authorities." He spoke so seriously, like he had no clue how ridiculous he sounded with that face of his. Seeing he was impossible to reason with, I turned to his guard instead, pressed my palms together and begged, "Sir, please, I'm really not a thief. Maybe take your master to a doctor? See if something can be done?" Too bad the guard had a thicker skull than his master. His Highness's orders are final. I glanced at my own fist, but matched against those 2 brutes, might as well compare a plum to a melon. And so, my great escape plan went up in smoke and landed me straight at the magistrate's feet. The pounding of the drum filled the air. Before the official even showed, my father and stepmother arrived. Seeing me tied up next to the wheelchair, both their eyes squinted into tiny, satisfied slits. My father slapped me across the face, knocking me to my knees. Heavens weep, what a disgrace to this family. My stepmother patted his back as if helping him breathe. "Chuner, you know your place. Your father and I searched all over the capital for over 10 years. Finally found the perfect match for you, and you still aren't content? Would you rather anger your father to death before you're happy?" They made it sound like I'd committed a grand crime. I scowled and opened my mouth to explain. "That's not." Crack, another slap from my stepmother, so hard I bit my own tongue. "Still trying to deny it? We got you a prince, and you still won't appreciate it. Now look, the prince himself caught you mid-escape. Who else would want to marry you after this? Good thing we hadn't prepared your dowry yet. You'll just have to enter the palace as a concubine." I stared at her in shock, and suddenly it clicked. If I'd really managed to sneak off without anyone noticing, how did they get here so fast? They must have set me up. I finally shouted, "Liar! You made me run on purpose. You're making me take Qingfeng's place and marry a crippled prince who supposedly brings bad luck to his wives, and you're not even giving me a dowry? Fine. If she wants to play dirty, I'll play rough." Then that so-called fool suddenly widened his eyes and bit down on all 10 fingers. "You're saying this pretty sister is my princess consort? But she actually tried to climb over the wall in the middle of the night?" My stepmother dabbed at her eyes dramatically. It's all my fault for not raising her well. I'll take her back and punish her thoroughly. Beat her to death if it comes to that. Father looked like he was about to pop a vein with disappointment. My heart nearly stopped. I thought, at worst, they'd just send me back to the countryside. But beat me to death? I sneaked a glance at the prince. Chen Shao looked totally unfazed, like he hadn't heard a word. Return home and get beaten to death, or get married and maybe die from bad luck. Not much of a choice. Still, who knows who'll bring death to whom first? I steeled myself, dropped to my knees, clutched his robe, dug my other hand hard into my thigh till tears came, and looked up at him. This humble girl admits her mistake. Please, Your Highness, have mercy. Judging by how he acted last night at the wall, I had a gut feeling there's more to him than meets the eye. But it was only a hunch, a gamble. I hadn't even finished pleading when Chen Shao laced his fingers, smiled brightly, and looked right at me. Pretty sister asked so nicely. How could I ever say no? Then he glanced at the guards behind him and said, Then tomorrow I'll marry my pretty sister. I'll provide her dowry myself. My father and stepmother stared at each other in disbelief, clearly caught off guard. Chen Shao just kept smiling at me, but the more he smiled, the more questions clouded my head. Less than a day later. Chen Shao had both betrothal gifts and dowry delivered in one go. There was so much gold and jewelry, it practically overflowed from the small courtyard I was staying in. On the wedding day, Qing Feng stood outside, arms crossed, sneering as she watched. So much gold and jade, too bad they're tying you to a brainless cripple with a cursed fate. Can't wait to see how that life turns out. I looked up and fired back. Sister, didn't your mother get someone to divine your future when you came of age? Said every year that you'd marry someone of great status? Yet here you are, already 20, still single. The one decent match, Prince Chen, and you pass him to me? What's more, you've clearly been eating too well lately. Wait too long and you won't just be old, you'll be out of options. Maybe worse off than me. Qing Feng's face turned a deep red, fury boiling as she lunged to yank off my phoenix crown. I lifted my foot and kicked her square in the stomach. Her maid rushed up just in time to pull her back. Miss, be careful of your stomach. Only then did she stop, pointing at me, teeth clenched. You little stray, used your foot on me? Let me tell you, my mother had it read again. I'm destined to be crown princess. Meanwhile, you'll spend your life wiping after that idiot. You'll be widowed within 2 years if he doesn't take you with him first. And even if you survive, you're stuck. Just wait and see how I deal with you. With that, she flung her sleeve and stormed off. I turned to the bronze mirror, straightened my tall phoenix crown, and lost myself in thought for a while. Same father, different mothers, but on my wedding day, she cursed me like I was her mortal enemy. Xier watched me from the side and sighed. Miss, if you're really worried, maybe we sneak out later when the crowd's thick. There's room for us somewhere in this world. I shook my head. We're already here. No point running. People say a lot of things. Doesn't mean they're true. I actually think His Highness doesn't seem so simple. And the curse? That might just be storytelling too. Xier blinked, surprised. I reminded her, don't you remember the storyteller we listened to at the market last year? Those 3 women who died were all from families connected to the ladies that caused his mother's death in the palace. Everyone says it's his mother's ghost haunting them, but I think the real ghost is the prince himself. Just like here in the Shangshu manor, the ghost haunting for my mother's injustice is me. On our wedding night, the moment the veil was lifted, the first thing I saw was a tall pair of legs. The man, who was supposed to be in a wheelchair, just stood up. But I didn't react much, just stared straight at him. He glanced at me with a smirk, a hint of tease in his eyes. Well, it's only been 2 years, elder sister Chun. Don't tell me you've forgotten me already? I froze for a second. Truth be told, I really shouldn't have forgotten him. When I was 6, my mother was caught in what they called an affair by the main wife of the Feng household. She insisted my mother had something with the stableman and dragged her to the magistrate. My poor mother, already 6 months pregnant, was thrown out. I cried for a whole day and night. Father whipped me with thin willow branches. saying that even though I was his flesh and blood, I was tainted. The main wife told him to go easy on me, but turned around and called in a priest. That priest took one look at me and said I brought bad luck, cursed my parents, cursed my husband-to-be, and had to be sent to the countryside to break the spell. I thought once I got there, the beatings would stop. I was wrong. They just dumped me and Sheer in an old empty house and left us to fend for ourselves. Every morning before dawn, we'd be out collecting firewood and herbs to make just enough money to scrape by, only returning when the sky turned completely dark. We were cold most days and hungry all the time. That went on for 5 years. One day, while I was up the mountain gathering firewood, I found a boy lying there in fine robes, looking like someone from a painting. I was about to walk away. I could barely keep myself and Sheer fed, let alone rescue a stranger. But something in me said good-looking usually meant rich. And if I saved him, maybe he'd be grateful. Maybe he'd reward us. Maybe we could finally afford a better place to live. So I bit the bullet, dragged him to the river, splashed water on him until he came to and shoved a piece of polygonatum root into his mouth from my basket. Then I just sat there and waited. I figured once he woke up, our lives would change for the better. Didn't expect the boy had knocked something loose in his head. Only thing he remembered was his name, Chen Xiao. No clue where he lived or who his parents were. Sheer looked worried and said, "Maybe we should just take him right back to where we found him. He eats 3 whole bowls of rice every day, and we're already stretched." But Chen Xiao just wiped his mouth, got up, and started picking up the dishes. "I won't eat for nothing. I can help with chores, chop wood, pick herbs with you. I won't be dead weight." I remembered my mother once said, saving a life brings you blessings. So I told Sheer, forget it, it's just an extra pair of chopsticks. Besides, with one more person around, the place doesn't feel so empty anymore. She sighed and said, "You're going to regret this, my lady." I stuffed some bamboo shoots into Chen Xiao's bowl. "You look like a bean sprout. Where's the strength to climb mountains?" He grinned. "Boys like me don't need much food, but got plenty of muscle." True enough, from then on, Chen Xiao went up the mountain with me to gather herbs every day. Sheer would take them to the market to sell. After a year of this, maybe his luck rubbed off on us or something. Our earnings tripled compared to before. But our days together didn't last. 1 year later, someone from the capital came and took him away. As thanks, they also left us with a big sum of money. I figured as long as we didn't blow it on gambling, it'd be enough for Sheer and me to live out our lives just fine in the countryside. Not even 2 years had passed when people from the Feng household came looking for me. Said they found me a great match. I was to marry a prince. The day before our return, Sheer and I were still marveling, saying Chen Xiao really was our lucky star. Ever since he showed up, everything started turning for the better. Now that he's gone, the luck stayed behind. Who'd have thought the Feng household would even remember you? And now they're marrying you off, to a prince no less. We didn't get to enjoy that thought for too long. That night, I overheard father and the main wife talking. And that's when I found out the prince I was marrying, the so-called favored son of the emperor, not only was he crippled and feeble-minded, but also cursed to bring doom to his wives. The marriage was originally meant for my legitimate sister. But my stepmother said, "My dear Qing was born with a phoenix fate. Only the crown prince is good enough for her. As for that useless cripple, he's already jinxed 3 fiancés to death. Good thing that cursed childhood friend of yours is still breathing. Let them wipe each other out." That's when it hit me. In the Prime Minister's manor, I'd never been anything more than a pawn to be moved wherever convenient. So I thought, fine, I'll take back control of my life. I planned to run away and dodge the wedding, only to bump into that smug, flashy fool from the other night. For some reason, he lost his mind and dragged me straight to the authorities in the middle of the night. That's when I swore, if he wasn't my idiotic fiancé, I'd marry the jinxed prince the very next day, just to spite him, get him thrown behind bars. Who would have thought, before I could deliver him to jail, I ended up in his bed first. Looking at him, I forced out an awkward laugh. "How could I forget? Your Highness did me a great favor back then." If not for you, I probably wouldn't even have had enough to eat or wear at that time. But you know me. All I've ever wanted in this life is a bit of wealth and comfort." He lounged off to the side, long legs crossed over the table, lips curled in a faint grin. "So, Princess," he said, "you never wanted payback against those who nearly got you and your mother killed." I paused. Of course I'd thought about it, but back then I had nothing, no power, no means. My revenge plans were nothing more than desperate fantasies of bloodshed. Perish one enemy, hurt myself just as much. I remembered something my mother said before she was cast out. Better a hard life than a noble death. And out there in the countryside, I didn't even have time to dream of revenge. I was barely surviving. "I can help you," he said, his tone suddenly cold. "What's the price?" Ever since the day they brought me back from the village, I knew nobody gives you anything for free. He stood, hand gently gripping my chin. The throne. That night, I got to know the burden he carried. Because he was the emperor's favorite son, his mother became the target of the entire harem. On the autumn hunt, they turned him into literal prey. He learned my mother had once been the prime minister's official wife. Just to boost his career, she agreed to be demoted to concubine and make room for another, and she got framed, had to escape with a 6-month-old baby. So we made a pact, share blood, share purpose. We'd back each other to the end. From then on, the prince's manor became my fortress for revenge, and I'd be his sharpest blade and cut down anyone who destroyed his mother. Next morning, a maid from the prime minister's manor showed up with the usual tonic. Chen Xiao had the bowl in hand, ready to drink. My gut said something was off. I interrupted. "Your Highness, you haven't had your preserved fruit today." Took the bowl from him, sniffed it, and frowned. The moment I stuck a silver hairpin in, the maid lunged with a dagger. Luckily, Chen Xiao reacted fast, swiftly pinned her down and dislocated her jaw. Before long, the pin turned pitch black. "Looks like your stepmother and sister really want me dead," I muttered. Chen Xiao's voice came cold and sharp. "It's the crown prince. He wants me out of the way." 7 days later at the palace banquet. Chen Xiao might have been labeled a fool, but he was still royalty, so even if people thought him simple-minded, etiquette demanded the invitation still went to his manor. But word in the capital was everywhere. He's a mad cripple, and I'm his cursed future wife. On our way in, everyone avoided me like the plague. Qing Feng stood with a group of noble ladies not far off, hand in hand, giving me that familiar, condescending look. A widow in the making, just her face is bad luck. Married to a lunatic and a cripple, and still grinning like that. Talk about being perfectly matched. I heard she tried to run away from the wedding. Can you believe the prince didn't mind? If I were her, I would have hanged myself long ago. Exactly. No idea why someone like her is even invited to a palace banquet, and she actually showed up like she belongs here. I'd planned on staying out of sight, but then I remembered what Chen Zhao told me on our wedding night. I'm his blade. Once you start holding back, it only gets easier to do it again. I turned, glanced at Qing Feng standing with a group of noble ladies, raised a brow and said, "What nonsense is this? The prince's health has been getting better by the day. Honestly, I could barely get out of bed the morning after our wedding. And this is the palace, no less. Dear sister, dragging these noble ladies along to gossip about royalty, does that reflect their upbringing? I mean, you're not getting younger either. Wait a few more years, and your only options might be the old bachelors over in East Street." Qing Feng's face flushed red. She reached for a willow twig nearby, clearly intending to hit me. The crowd that had backed away earlier quickly gathered again, wanting to witness me getting punished on my first palace visit. I looked at that twig, ready to grab it midair. If she hit me, I'd hit her back. Just as the willow branch came swinging down, a fair and slender hand caught it midair. "And you think you can touch this prince's wife?" Still seated in his wheelchair, Chen Xiao looked composed and refined, his hair neatly tied with a jade crown. He no longer had the awkward rural look or the timid, tense air from a few days ago. It was like someone had unsealed him. I was just about to swoon when I suddenly heard a sarcastic voice behind me, followed by the sound of clapping. Who would have thought? Sixth brother gets married and suddenly knows how to stand up for someone. I glanced between Chen Xiao and the crown prince. The tension crackled like lightning between them. I recalled Chen Xiao once told me the crown prince had been poisoning him ever since his return to the capital. Worried his brother was up to no good, I quickly stepped in front of Chen Xiao. Of course, the physician said having a harmonious marriage is great for my lord's recovery. I didn't wait for the crown prince's comeback, just pushed Chen Xiao away. Still, I caught the flicker of cold fury in the crown prince's eyes. I leaned closer to Chen Xiao. I could have handled Qingfeng just fine on my own. You just exposed your recovery the day after the wedding. Aren't you afraid he'll come at you even harder? Chen Xiao gently patted my hand. Try harder? Didn't he already? That was on day 2. Relax. Letting him see I'm recovering is all part of the plan. Credit goes to you, actually. I raised a brow. Me? Golden wine flowed, and laughter echoed through the banquet hall. The emperor kept glancing our way. I hear that since getting married, Chen Xiao's mental confusion and leg problems have improved a lot. Is it true? Amazingly, Chen Xiao stood up and replied, Grateful for your majesty's concern. I've recovered well. Gasps rippled through the hall. After all, since disappearing during that hunting trip a few years ago and being found again, Chen Xiao had looked completely broken, trapped in a wheelchair, acting like a child. No one expected him to be able to stand, let alone deliver a formal speech. Naturally, people were stunned. I quietly sipped my tea, trying to blend into the background. But from the corner of my eye, I noticed the crown prince clenched his fists, his eyes red with suppressed rage, like he'd just realized he'd been tricked. The emperor, on the other hand, was unmistakably pleased. He actually stepped off the throne himself, unable to hide the joy on his face. Grabbing Chen Xiao's wrist, he turned to me and asked, Princess Chen, is it true? Has my son really recovered? Then he looked back at a man in black robes with long hair draped over his shoulders. Grand Diviner, what's the meaning of this? While the emperor was distracted, I sneaked a glance at the diviner and caught the silent exchange of looks between him and the crown prince. I quickly shot Chen Xiao a look. We both got it. There was definitely more to Chen Xiao's illness, and the grand diviner was likely right in the middle of it. I looked at the emperor and said, Father, you're not mistaken. His Highness can really walk again. The imperial astrologer walked slowly down from the platform, holding his compass, sweat dripping down his face. He bowed to the emperor and said, Your Majesty, based on the birth charts of His Highness and the Princess Consort, the prince's recovery is because of her. Though His Highness bears the fate of loneliness, the Princess Consort's strong destiny somehow countered it. Alone, they'd both be doomed to solitude, but together, it's like poison canceling poison. But the Princess Consort's fate may be too strong. If this continues, I fear. Chen Xiao looked at the astrologer with a polite smile, but his eyes were full of disdain. The emperor, however, only heard the first part. He grasped our hands tightly and beamed. Marvelous, truly marvelous. I only meant to find a gentle wife for my son, never thought she'd actually cure him. I heard from the servants that you like gold. Very well, I'll grant you 1,000 taels. My heart jumped with joy, and I quickly knelt to thank him. Just below the dais, my father, stepmother, and Qingfeng sat stiffly, pale as ghosts. As we were leaving the palace, Qingfeng showed up again, blocking my path like a persistent shadow. She frowned, arms crossed, and scoffed. Qingfeng, don't think I don't know what tricks you pulled to make him stand. You might have made him walk today, but what about tomorrow or next year? Don't forget you were born cursed to be alone. I casually brushed a flower petal off her shoulder and said, True, there's still a long road ahead. But didn't you hear the astrologer? Both His Highness and I are cursed, and somehow that balanced out. Still, dear sister, you'd better watch out. You wouldn't want your lucky star to turn into a disaster, would you? She stomped her foot. Still better than being some low-born tramp's daughter like you. My smile dropped, and my voice turned cold. Did you really need to bring up my mother? She raised her chin proudly. Just reminding you, your mother got what she deserved, dragging herself through dirt. I lowered my eyes and climbed into the carriage without another word. Chen Xiao noticed my expression and asked what happened. Lifting the curtain, I looked out and said quietly, I may have been too soft with some people. I didn't want to go that far, but if she insists on pushing her luck, that's on her. He pulled me into his arms. Sounds like she brought it on herself. After the banquet, noble ladies in the capital who used to shun me began acting friendly. One invited me to tea, another to see flowers. Suddenly, I was the center of attention. Chen Xiao flipped through a couple of invitations and chuckled. Not long ago, everyone saw you as cursed. Now they're all lining up to be your friend, princess. I shrugged. That's only 'cause you used to be the emperor's favorite. I recall storytellers saying that if not for your illness, the crown prince title wouldn't be set in stone. He leaned back in his chair and after a pause said, "Then I'll count on you, princess, to help me win it back." 3 days later, I accepted an invitation from the duchess, who also had a rough past thanks to her so-called bad luck, to visit Yuqing Temple and pray. On the way, she held my hand tightly, recounting her old hardships. My greedy uncles and cousins were after my mother's inheritance. As soon as father passed, they kicked us out of the house. Luckily, I was tough and lucky enough. I fought beside the duke in war, and even the emperor thinks twice before crossing me now. But your luck might even be better, fixing the prince. Who thought that ever happened? I smiled to myself. Chen Xiao was never truly sick, and I wasn't some miracle, cursed woman. We were just two people who refused to accept what fate handed us. But I could only keep nodding at the duchess. It wasn't until we'd finished paying respects and were strolling through the back courtyard of Yuqing Temple, admiring the spring blossoms, that we suddenly caught some rather questionable sounds. The duchess was especially sensitive to such noises and immediately headed toward the chanting room, as if determined to investigate. I quickly grabbed her hand. "It's spring, your grace. Might just be some cats or dogs mating. No need to spoil your mood over it." Then I turned to Sheer and said, "Go check inside, see what's going on." The duchess gave me this look, so full of disapproval it was almost funny. "Princess Consort, this is the Yuqing Temple, not some inn. How could such things happen under a deity's gaze?" I sighed. "Life goes on, your grace. Nature takes its course." She shook her head. "They say your fate's hard, but I think your heart's too soft. But this kind of thing, it must be stopped." Soon, Sheer came back looking more than a little uneasy. The duchess narrowed her eyes. "Well, what did you see?" Sheer stumbled over her words, clearly nervous. Annoyed, the duchess muttered, "Useless," and pushed past us, storming toward the door. But the second she swung it open, she screamed, loud enough to startle the doves roosting on the roof into flight. No one noticed the faint smirk at Sheer's lips or mine. Through the duchess's stunned figure, we saw them, Qingfeng and the crown prince, completely disheveled. As the door flung open, the crown prince still had his hand resting on Qingfeng's barely showing belly. Later that day, Qingfeng was dragged back to the House of Ministry, blindfolded and tied like a criminal. By nightfall, their affair had already spread across the capital like wildfire. And since I came from the same house, everyone at the prince's residence now looked at me with disdain. Seer swung by with news. Apparently, I was getting blamed at court too, with some even asking His Majesty to revoke our marriage. "She's from the House of Ministry," they said. "Such disgrace has no place in the royal family." For a second, my heart caught, then settled right back where it was. I glanced at Sheer. "That's it?" She looked like she was about to pull her hair out. "Isn't that enough already? Lady Yue got thrown out of the house back then, all because of gossip. If I'd known this would happen, I wouldn't have gone along with your plan, your grace. This is like winning a fight but wrecking yourself too." I waved her off. "It's not the same. Sheer, think about it. Doesn't Qingfeng's situation now look just like my mother's back then?" Sheer was still pacing, trying to wrap her head around it, when Chen Xiao walked in from outside. Ever since the palace banquet, His Majesty had ordered him back to court. He looked at me, deep eyes unreadable, a yellow imperial scroll in hand. I jumped up and exchanged a worried glance with Sheer. "Please tell me he's not here to send me packing." I took a deep breath. Back on our wedding night, he promised we'd face things together. But the trauma from my early years, some things just don't go away overnight. I froze, staring straight at that scroll. "What's that?" He took my hand, placed the scroll in it, and said bluntly, "Take a look for yourself." I opened it, already annoyed. My fist thudded against his arm as I shot him a glare. The scroll didn't say he was divorcing me. It said I was to be adopted by the Duchess, officially severing ties with the House of Ministry. It was good news, and yet his deadpan face almost gave me a heart attack. He caught my fist and smirked. "Heard your dear sister got bundled up like a maid and delivered to the Crown Prince's manor last night. My informant says that if not for the prince still needing the ministry's support, he wouldn't have even made her a concubine. Well, Princess Consort, are you satisfied now?" I tilted my head and smiled. "What do you think, Your Highness? But hey, until that stepmother of mine marries the stable hand, this game ain't over yet." 3 months later, His Highness took me to Fanlu for a meal. He ordered a whole table full of dishes, and just as everything was served, a commotion broke out next door. I was never one to sit still when something juicy was going on. Nosing around always beat eating. So without a second thought, I leaned over to peek through the crack in the door. And what a scene. Standing in the middle of the room was the Crown Prince, face flushed with anger. Opposite him were the disguised imperial diviner and the physician from the prince's residence, both kneeling. The Crown Prince was breathing heavily, chest heaving with rage, and suddenly he flipped the entire table. Soup splashed everywhere. He pointed at the two men and practically shouted, "You said Chen Xiao had a deadly tribulation this year. That as long as he made it through, I'd have nothing to worry about. And you? Didn't you swear those poisons you gave to that useless idiot were the deadliest? So why is he up and walking around? Why has he regained his wits and is now helping the emperor handle court affairs? Why?" He was losing it, ranting like a frustrated toddler. I turned to Chen Xiao with a click of my tongue. "Looks like someone's starting to panic." Chen Xiao sipped his wine, eyes glinting with amusement. "Does her ladyship have a plan?" I pouted. "Maybe it's time to go all in. At this rate, that poor kid's gonna throw a tantrum." Chen Xiao raised an eyebrow. "If we lay all our cards on the table, think you can win?" He said it with a smile, but had already risen from his seat and reached out to take my hand. "But whatever you've got in mind, I'll go along with it." That day, the Crown Prince finally pieced it all together. The year Chen Xiao's mother was framed, when he supposedly went missing, he never actually lost his memory. Back at the residence, he never drank any of the mind-damaging medicine prescribed by the physician. As for the diviner, Chen Xiao had seen through his mediocre tricks ages ago. Turns out Chen Xiao had been putting on a show all along, feeding off the information gathered by the spies he'd planted in the Crown Prince's household. And from that day, he made it clear they were no longer pretending. He was coming for the Crown Prince's title, fair and square. As for me, I wasn't about to rest until the truth about my own family came crashing down. Before leaving, I glanced at my sister sitting quietly in the corner, her belly as round as a watermelon. "Big sister," I said with a smile, "you better enjoy your days in the Crown Prince's estate while you still can. Chances are you won't even make it as a concubine before long." She shot up at once, grabbed a bowl, and hurled it at me. Chen Xiao reached out and blocked it with ease, letting it crash harmlessly to the ground at the Crown Prince's feet. "Tsk, tsk," he said. "Looks like His Highness still hasn't learned the basics. Manage your own house first if you want to rule a country." Once the emperor confirmed Chen Xiao had fully recovered his mind, he started handing him task after task. Today it was corrupt officials, tomorrow inspecting the treasury. It felt like His Majesty was making up for all those idle years when Chen Xiao had been pretending to be a fool. Especially with the drought in Yuzhou and that epidemic in Yunmeng. I turned to Chen Xiao and asked, "Don't you think Father is thinking about replacing the Crown Prince? He's putting the two of you on the same job. Historically, these things always went straight to the heir, didn't they?" Chen Xiao closed the book of military strategy and said, "Isn't that just how it should be? That position should have been mine from the start. And the Prince Consort's seat, you were always meant for it." I looked at him, not quite catching the meaning of his last words. Even though they share the same father, the way the Crown Prince and Chen Xiao handled disasters couldn't have been more different. When we were first assigned to deal with the epidemic in Yunmeng, Chen Xiao and I wasted no time. We gathered all the imperial doctors and headed out right away. After figuring out what caused the illness, we prescribed medications accordingly. He pulled silver directly from the treasury of Prince Chen's manor and sent people to nearby towns to buy herbs. Every day, we gave out porridge and medicine. Over in Yuzhou, from what the informants reported, the crown prince spent his days dragging around a so-called mystic, praying for rain. That charlatan claimed it's because the people of Yuzhou offended the Dragon King. They need to apologize. So the crown prince ordered the already struggling folks to build a new temple for the Dragon King with their own money and labor. He demanded daily offerings and incense. But despite the fanfare, the place was filled with corpses due to starvation. And still, not a single drop of rain. The crown prince went as far as taking 100 taels of gold from the national treasury to give to the mystic. The result? Dude ran off in the middle of the night. A month later, when Chen Xiao and I got back to the capital to report, we saw the crown prince on his knees. The emperor's face was flushed red, one hand gripping his desk just to stay on his feet. All the memorials were scattered across the floor. How did I end up with a son like you? You tell me, how the hell do I pass the throne to someone like this? Chen Xiao and I exchanged a glance, both sighing under our breath. Then we stepped forward and asked for permission to help alleviate Yuzhou's drought. With the emperor's approval, we took the deputy minister of works and started constructing river channels to bring water into Yuzhou. The moment we turned to leave, we heard the emperor order the crown prince to be confined. 3 months later, Chen Xiao and I returned to the capital with news that the drought in Yuzhou had eased. When we entered the palace, the eunuch beside the emperor looked visibly troubled. My lord and lady, the emperor was absolutely thrilled to know you solved the drought problem. He even planned a celebratory banquet, but it's unfortunate the Empress Dowager has fallen ill. Everyone in the palace needs to tend to her. I nodded at him and said, "It's all right. Grandmother-in-law's health comes first. It's my duty as her granddaughter-in-law to serve her as well." Chen Xiao glanced at me, and we both smiled knowingly. 3 days later, I was walking with the Empress Dowager in the garden to help her relax. As we passed by the Eastern Palace, I thought I heard the faint sound of music. She asked if I heard it too. I quickly put on a respectful look and said, "Maybe someone's doing rituals inside to pray for your recovery?" But she shook her head, pulling her hand from mine and walking straight in. Nobody was guarding the entrance. I had no choice but to follow behind, and there he was. The crown prince, perched high on his seat, girls on each arm, watching a performance with a smug look while his guards sat around boozing. He took a swig and sneered, "Chen Xiao, that bastard's just some fancy trickster. The gods told me, no one can shake my place as crown prince. Once I get the throne, the entire Prince Chen's manor's done for. You'll all be consorts too, every last one of you. As for that sickly old Empress Dowager, what kind of nursing care does she even need? When I become emperor, I'll toss her in some remote palace and leave her to rot." He raised his cup again, drinking from the goblet passed by a nearby beauty. The Empress Dowager gripped her cane, trembling from head to toe. I stepped up to help her, but she shoved me away. "Guards, bring the emperor," she shouted. "Let him see for himself. The prince he picked turned out like this." The emperor was absolutely furious. That day, he actually drew his sword and chased on Xiao all over the Eastern Palace, storming through the halls for nearly half a day. By the time Chen Xiao arrived, he had no clue what was going on and almost watched his father chop off An Xiao's arm on the spot. Chen Xiao rushed to snatch the sword from the emperor's hands. "Please calm down, father. Regardless of what my brother and his mother did to frame my mother back then, he's still your son. Bad move." He shouldn't have brought that up. The moment he mentioned it, the emperor flared up again and tried grabbing the sword back. Even the Empress Dowager frowned deeply. I tugged lightly at her sleeve. She gave the back of my hand 2 gentle pats, murmured a quick "well done," and stepped up. "Sire, no matter how disgraceful this son of yours has acted, he's still one of your own. If you kill him now, people will say the House of Shao fell to infighting." And Xiao's eyes lit up with a glimmer of hope at her words. But then she went on, voice sharp. I've been feeling unwell these days, and guess who's been looking after me? Not one visit from the prince's consorts. It's been the crown princess tending to me this whole time. And as for state matters, when there was a drought in Yuzhou and a plague in Yunmeng, who handled it? The prince and princess of Chen did. Let's talk about filial piety and competence. Do you see any of that in your dear son? Killing him would be too easy. Strip him of his title and give the position to someone who actually deserves it. I exchanged a glance with Chen Xiao. We both dropped to our knees. Please think twice, father, Chen Xiao said. I'm unworthy. Titles and duties aside, we only did what any dutiful son and subject should. We'd never claim credit for that. We bowed our heads together in silent respect. But that only pushed the emperor over the edge. He flung his sleeves, glaring down at Chen Xiao. I've made up my mind. If your mother hadn't been framed, if you hadn't lost your mind back then, there's no way this ungrateful child would have ever become crown prince. Xiao Li, draft the decree, strip Xiao of his title. From this day forward, the Prince of Chen will take his place and begin acting as regent. I looked to the side, where my sister stood, disheveled and disgraced, the corner of my mouth curled slightly. So much for that child of hers I once worried over. A part of me had felt torn. Killing her meant harming the innocent, but letting her go might come back to haunt us. Luckily, both she and the former prince were a mess in their own ways. While Chen Xiao and I were busy in Yunmeng dealing with the plague, we'd already heard from scouts. She got into a fight out of jealousy over one of An Xiao's favorite concubines. That led to the miscarriage of a 6-month-old baby boy. Once Chen Xiao became crown prince, the first thing he did was investigate the Ministry of Rights. And wow, we had no idea how dirty things really were. Turns out my father had been no honest official. He built everything off my mother's family name and her dowry, spent her money on shady loans, all while flirting behind her back with Qingfeng's mother. He'd tell people my mother wasn't attractive anymore and needed to step aside. And when he wormed his way into higher powers, he used fake records to make himself look clean, a crooked man in the guise of a modest official. As for my stepmother, she wasn't exactly sitting idle. Behind my father's back, she got involved with countless men. And my poor mother, so gentle, so endlessly forgiving, she tolerated it all until she was handed off like some old maid to one of the stable hands. Luckily, that coachman was loyal. Even after he and my mother were kicked out of the Shangshu manor, he never once crossed any lines. He just kept serving her the way people did back when she lived with my maternal family. Chen Xiao asked me how I planned to deal with my father. I said, I think it's up to my mother. In the prison, my father and stepmother were in dirty prison clothes, hair a mess, bruises everywhere. The guards already told us, after my father found out about her cheating, they'd been fighting nonstop. Beatings, yelling. If it weren't for the ginseng soup mixed in their meals, they probably wouldn't even be conscious. As soon as they saw us, they scrambled over and dropped to their knees, begging me to let them go for the sake of our family ties. To be fair, their crimes, severe enough to behead them, lenient enough to exile. I turned to my mother and asked, "Do you want to spare them?" Her eyes turned cold, instantly. They don't deserve it. With that, she turned and walked off. I looked at the two behind the iron bars and shrugged. You had your chance. You just didn't want it. Honestly, I never expected her to forgive them. I brought her here just so she could see for herself. The people who made her suffer finally got what they deserved. Chen Xiao's coronation day was beautiful, not a cloud in the sky. But then, those two showed up, looking like they'd crawled out of a ditch, wearing rags, covered in filth. They charged at us with knives, shouting, "You disgusting pair, I'll kill you." Didn't even make it to the hall before the outer guards took them down. Turned out it was the former crown prince and his consort. 10 years of bitterness, and they thought they'd take us down. Well, that didn't go as planned. I told Sheer to stuff one of Grandma's old foot wraps in their mouths, then turned and walked the red carpet with Chen Xiao. After 10 years in the countryside, 10 years as a pretend crown princess, I get it now. The best revenge? Letting your enemies watch You get everything they dreamed of, while they're left with nothing but illusions. After the coronation, Chen Xiao and I had them sent back to the countryside, same place we used to live. No fancy house, just a drafty little cottage. We assigned a few people to check on them every now and then, make sure they lived long enough to regret everything. Let them taste what we went through. They couldn't take it. Grew up spoiled, soft, less than half a year later, dropped dead from heartbreak. I looked at Chen Xiao and sighed. Guess we're actually pretty tough. Lived through all that, and still kicking. But hey, back then you said I was born to be the crown princess. Were you really buying into that fortune teller nonsense? Chen Xiao shot me a mocking smile. You fought beside me for years? You think I'm as dumb as he was? That stuff about fate? Nah, I knew we were betrothed from the beginning. I was just sure I'd end up as crown prince. I blinked. Betrothed? He pulled out a jade talisman from my mother's side of the family. Yup, your mom and mine were close friends. You just didn't know. I stared at him wide-eyed. Maybe sometimes fate really does pull the strings.